This is fictional mindbender. The concept of honor goes hand in hand with fantasy martial arts shows, and the Highlander the Series was no different. Typically, its protagonist, Duncan MacLeod, is living by this concept of morality as kind of an unwritten moral code. A trust that an immortal is going to follow the rules of the game and not cheat. And for those immortals who do cheat, like Xavier St. Cloud for example, the show kind of unconsciously tells us, the viewers, that these villains are more than just villains, but dishonorable, somehow making them even lower on the morality scale of humanity than normal. People who cannot be trusted by anyone and are willing to do absolutely anything to win, rather than just the typical low-life actions that your typical bad guy would do. However, the better writing of later seasons introduced a more nuanced concept to honor and depiction as well, by putting the Highlander of Clan MacLeod into situations where his honor was either compromised or seen through the eyes of other characters as being somewhat self-righteous rather than righteous. For example, MacLeod is often depicted as always being ready to help those in need, even when it's not asked for. Why? Because, as his friend Joe Dawson says, he's a protector, a warrior raised in a conflict-ridden society where honor and codes of conduct were strictly adhered to on a level of religion. MacLeod inserts himself into the middle of a gangland conflict, for example. He assists a Russian prostitute who was on the run from her Cossack immortal boss when he needed not be involved, and in fact, the woman didn't want his help in the first place. Duncan is extremely protective of his lovers, even against friends and family who would gladly assist him or do the job themselves should he be unable to do so. It's his job, no one else's. Stay in your lane. And the most obvious display of his honor is his running vendettas against other immortals who have either committed great evils or crossed him in some way, shape, or form. The show frequently takes occasions to basically test these ideas, test these standards, and see if it's as righteous as MacLeod seems to make it out to be. Such as when one of his immortal enemies, Ottavio Consone, defeated him in a duel over the hand of a woman they were both in love with in Spain. Ottavio was about to kill him, but the woman, whose name was Teresa, convinces him that if she marries Octavio, that Duncan's life will be spared. Of course, Duncan can barely stand for this, but Teresa has just as strong a constitution of honor as MacLeod does, and binds herself to an oath to never speak to him nor see him again, and desperately urges him to leave and have a happy life. Later on, when MacLeod returns to Spain, he finds out later that Ottavio actually murdered her out of jealousy. Duncan goes into his typical revenge mode before being told at Teresa's grave that she wanted him to be happy, and for her honor and her memory, decides to leave Spain without taking vengeance on Ottavio. Another interesting test is when MacLeod is being hunted by one Stephen Keane, an immortal protege of a mortal British earl who had been responsible for ordering the massacres of Scotsmen after the Battle of Culloden in 1745. An enraged Duncan, who fought in that battle, goes on a killing spree, killing any Brit he can get his hands on, before finally disappearing from Scotland and moving on. Keane, however, had not moved on. And what's interesting about Keane is that, for all intents and purposes, he was Duncan MacLeod's mirror image, only doing what Duncan himself had done countless times before with other immortals who were evil, doing acts that MacLeod himself apparently had also done. And, even more so, Keane was not resorting to underhanded tactics like other villains have done. Keane, essentially, was honorable. As such, this puts Duncan on the role of the villain, a role that he probably never saw himself as, or one that he hoped would never happen. And though he was regretful for his past mistakes and insisted to Keane that he had changed, Keane outright tells him that he does not care and judges him on his past actions. Again, something that MacLeod often does. Therefore, Duncan now feels honor-bound to give him his chance at revenge. But his friends tend to differ. Mythos, Joe, and Amanda do everything in their power to prevent this duel from happening, because they don't want Duncan to die, and in fact see the whole thing as basically pretty stupid. Something that happened a long time ago for people who were, as Amanda says, a long time dead, and it doesn't really matter anymore. But to Keen, and to McLeod as well, it does matter. It's as real to them now as it was in 1745. And what's even more interesting here is that, like Keen, McLeod's friends are doing what Duncan himself has done many times before, inserting themselves in a position where the person they're trying to save can't help themselves. Only, this particular time, Duncan turns down their help, even threatening to kill Mythos, who was about to kill Keen himself. And this is a great example in terms of presenting how honor is not necessarily a moral code per se, because McLeod is going so far as to even threaten his friends who are trying to basically save his life. Or in other words, no one during this episode was doing anything evil. Everyone was doing what was good in their own eyes, basically. And McLeod, by his honor, had to let that play out. However, the greatest conundrum of honor that the series ever did, in my opinion, is when McLeod intervenes in the assassination attempt on a Middle East dictator. He saves him, only to find out that it was set up by his bodyguard, a bodyguard who was also an immortal named Qasim, whom McLeod had dealt with in the past and swore an oath to centuries ago to save the life of a boy who had the misfortune of falling in love with the princess that Qasim was protecting. Like Keen, Qasim is also not an evil immortal, and is also similar to McLeod, being an immortal warrior and protector. Only, his loyalty is to the royal house of that country, and the dictator that Duncan just saved is standing in the way of that house's ascension back to power. Moreover, Qasim makes it clear that the young man who is now the current head of the house and a descendant of its founder is a good man. He is not evil, in comparison to the dictator who's just basically a traitorous asshole. So, therefore, in Qasim's opinion, Duncan should have no problem killing this man. I guess he's saying it to assuage his concept of honor, and therefore causing the honor debt that Duncan made to him centuries ago. The Highlander fumbles over the issue for quite a while. He doesn't believe in murder, though the dictator is also clearly evil, so could you really call it murder? I mean, how is it different from what he's done with the other times? Still, he is bound by his ancient clan's honor to carry through with the assassination attempt. But his lover at the time, Rachel McLeod, encourages him not to do so, saying that a man of honor lives with what he does. Thus, Duncan does not go through with the murder attempt, but instead has the leader swear that though he could have killed him, he spared his life in return for his word that the young man will not be harmed, because the leader recognizes him as a threat, being the current descendant of the royal house of that nation. However, things fall through very fast. The leader betrays McLeod and kills the young man anyway in a double cross, and causes Qasim to fall into a desperate and immense grief over not fulfilling his own promise to the house's founder to protect the family line. Qasim therefore kidnaps Rachel, demanding that Duncan give up his life in return for the life he did not take, and a life that was lost in the process for his own actions. Duncan defeats him and spares Qasim's life, as he did not kidnap Rachel out of evil intent, but just for the situation that McLeod himself had put him in. Rachel later leaves, believing Duncan has taken the higher moral road, only for we the viewers to later find out at the end of the episode that in fact he actually went back and kills the dictator for breaking his word to him, now fulfilling his oath. Now, there are other great examples of this struggle between honor and what to do and what not to do, but in my opinion, this was by far the best episode for it, because it shows just how far Duncan can bend his concept of honor to the changing moral standards of the times. That essentially, he can twist and bend it as long as there's no direct pledge or oath given to a person, or, in other words, that there was just basically room for interpretation. However, once a commitment is made, he simply cannot live without following through on it. Or, in other words, he is a man of honor who cannot live with what he does if that means breaking the oath. And this is just one of the many nuances and complexities that Highlander the Series tends to introduce, taking the stereotypical view of honor as some sort of moral code and turning it into a complex and dense web of loyalties and consequences for the person who is trying to follow through with it. But let me know your thoughts below. This is the Fictional Mindbender. Have a good day.